We've got a fair bit we want to try and cover today. So for those that don't know me, my name's Graham Cook. I'm the MD of RSVP Design, and Kim is supporting us here today. Kim, you may have dealt with if you've been in touch with the sales and marketing team at all. So today we're going to take a look at a product called Voyage Mapping. So I want to explore a little bit of this product. Some of you may have some experience of it, some of you may not. Hopefully we can bring everyone to the same point within the next hour, which is the maximum I plan to be on here for. So, again, if you've joined me before, you'll see a familiar format. We're going to give you a little bit of introduction and background as to where the design came from. Lots of people are always interested in how these things are created. A bit more specifics on what is Voyage Mapping and how does it work. A little bit on the learning you might use it for, and then questions at the end. As ever, however, if you do have questions, I suggest you stick them in the chat, send them to Kim. If she can answer straight away, she'll do that. If not, we'll open mics and Kim will interrupt me. So I think most people have already got their mics off, which is perfect. Happy for you to leave cameras on, even better, and so we can see what's going on. So a little bit of background. It's always interesting for me when I go and look at these. So when I looked and was trying to remember when we'd first created this product, the best I could come up with was around 2004. And we did set up the business in 2003, so it must have been kind of relatively shortly after that. And we wanted to provide this idea of a group business planning tool. And the four pictures you see are kind of different versions as it's grown. The version top left is a kind of hardback version, and that's I was working a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to talk a little bit more on that. The version of the right is just a kind of more portable version of that. It's just a roll-up. It's the same size, but easier to carry about. Bottom right is a larger roll-up version, which could work with larger groups, including if you want to do it on the wall. And the bottom left is a kind of individual coaching version, and I'll talk a little bit about that too as we go forward. So in terms of background, my colleagues that we started the business with, Jeff and Anne, they were looking to create what we called a business-focused tool, so something that you could use in a business, but also it had to be visually interesting and appealing, and Anne was particularly interested in being able to use it as an action planning tool. And when we thought about this, we recognised that you'll hear many individuals and organisations talk in metaphor, particularly around journeys when they're either describing their experiences. So you'll hear things, yeah, this year's been a long, hard road. It's been an uphill struggle, but I think we've reached the summit. I think both of these maybe relate to the last couple of years in COVID. We're at a crossroads. We need to make a very decisive change in direction. So the metaphor of a journey either into the future or one that you've taken is pretty common. So what we did was to think more of a sea journey and created this kind of visual. And the idea is that in olden times, people would set out having maybe some idea of where they were going. If they were trying to chart new land, they would try to learn what they did from previous experience. And the idea here is, if you imagine that red dot on the left is where you're taking off from, you would have a dot on the right you're trying to get to, and you might have an intermediate dot down at the bottom there in the middle. So this idea of a seafaring journey was what we decided to use. And we recognised certainly there was an initial appetite for that kind of process back in 2004. And I don't know if you've ever been involved in developing a business plan, but my experience certainly is it's not something that several people sit around if you're really old, a typewriter, or if you're really new, an iPad and create as a group. Typically one person would do it, even if you have other input. So we wanted to be able to have that kind of immediate group input. There also became this appetite for different versions as we went along, and the individual coaching version I mentioned is something that's a lot more recent. Well, that was back in 2004, but what's that got to do with today? So we've pulled this out for a number of things, but the Future of Jobs survey from the World Economic Forum over the next 5 years, if you look at those top few things: critical thinking and analysis, problem solving, self-management, working with people, management and communication of activities, all things which seem to be increasing in terms of skills, are all skills that you have to apply and indeed could build while using Voyage Mapping. So it seems still to be relevant in the kind of marketplace that we find ourselves in today. I always like to do this and throw in a Google search. So if we are saying that Voyage Mapping is a critical thinking and an analysis tool, what happens if you put that into search? Well, I guess the first thing is, 243 million results, and RSVP Design's not on the front page, but never mind, we'll continue to try and boost our marketing a little bit. What I thought was interesting was the categories of tools there in the middle. It talks about background knowledge, criteria for judgment, critical thinking, vocabulary, thinking strategies, and habits of mind. Again, those are all things that we had in mind when we looked to create Voyage Mapping, and are all applications I think of it today. This one was a bit more surprising for me. We also talk about it being a group planning, business planning tool. And when you put that into Google, you actually get 1.87 billion, which seems to be a huge number of results for something I thought that would be quite, specific. Again, I haven't gone through all of those results, and again, we're not on the top page there, but a lot of it refers to, business development in terms of financial planning and creating plans for startups and so on. And our tool could be used for that, but it's certainly not designed to be something around creating financial models. Coincidentally, I received this email from a company that I've got a great deal of respect for, Herman Brain Dominance Institute, and it was a little thing just talking about reflection. And I thought it was entirely appropriate for what I was going to talk about here. Kicking off the November month, year-end holidays. This is an American company, soon to approach. A great time to press pause, stop and think about the year we've all shared. And I think that's particularly appropriate whenever your year-end is, but also at many times as we go through, I guess, the busy lives and the kind of chaos that the world seems to be in right now. So that's a little bit of background and introduction. So what is it and how does it work, which I'm sure most people are more keen to get to. So the first version that we created was this hardback version. So you can see there, if you're in Europe, it's a kind of A2 size case. The board there is it's got a kind of hardback, so you don't need a surface to use it on. The materials that you get if you order a Voyage Mapping hardback version include this reusable board. So as I say, you can see 2/3 of it. It folds out and will fold back into that case. There are 5 sets of 15 different cartoons. You can see the cartoon stickers a little bit in the middle there. You get activity briefs and keys that explain a little bit more about these cartoons, and I will talk about that in a second for 2 purposes. One would be to reflect on past experience, and the second would be to chart the future. So are we looking at something that's happened and want to understand it better, or are we looking to create an action plan for the future? And of course, some pens to begin to use it with. So how does it work? So what I decided to do, the best way to kind of show you how it works is to take one of these scenarios and to look at a reflection activity first. So again, typically as a facilitator, you would decide what that reflection topic or activity is. It might be with a view to kind of inform or reflect on how that will affect the future. Again, it's a very useful process when you're planning the future, is to see what happened in the past. And as I mentioned, that's certainly what seafarers would have done in olden times. And the second area might be just to deepen that learning through reflection. We know that reflection is a really powerful way to deepen learning, and going through this process can help do that. So I decided to say, well, let's reflect on past experience. And as a group in RSVP, we decided to do this. And what we did was say, well, let's review business performance in the last period. And what lessons have we learned from COVID? So in the UK, we've been out of COVID for about a year. And as a business, we've been kind of back in the office for about a year. So we said, let's look at that year, October to October. And the first part of this process, this is an excerpt from the facilitator guide that we provide. The first thing we ask people to do is to think about that map, think about that journey. So for most people, it's unlikely to be a straight line. In this case, this shows someone kind of going round in circles towards the start. If you're leaving from the left, having a kind of intermediate place that we're trying to get to there, and then a kind of fairly straightforward link to home. So asking people just to think about what, in your mind's eye, what did that journey kind of feel like if you were to draw it out? And this was ours. There was 3 of us working on this, so you can see it's actually a very straight line up at the top, some kind of ups and some downs in the middle, and a bit of a dip in the red one at the bottom before I kind of dive for home. So that's the first stage you ask people to do. So once that shape is measured, we ask people to start to look at the cartoons. And we're using the cartoon images to help kind of stimulate thinking, not necessarily asking them to immediately put them on in order, but just to get some time understanding what they might mean and to make your own interpretations for them. If you're like me, an engineer by training and can't draw anything, then it's really useful to have pictures you can do. If you're very creative, and we often see this, some people will draw their own images, which is perfectly fine. But the idea of this is to get people started and to give them something they can link to. So again, here's some extracts from a few of them. So if you were looking at learning from the past, so the storms, what do we remember as being the rough seas, the fog, and what areas did we lack enough vision to be able to set a clear course? I don't know about you, but certainly during COVID, I think my voyage mapping was just full of fog. Pirates could be anything where you didn't really want it to happen. It can be competitors, it could be anything else. So we're getting people just to stimulate some ideas. I don't understand why, but I've got a good guess. But Mad Captain seems to be one of the most popular stickers that people choose. Sometimes the management decisions seem mad or bizarre. How good was the understanding? So certainly people gravitate to that one pretty easily. Some are kind of quite negative, obviously, asleep at the wheel. Some can be quite positive if merchants were, what you were able to bring on resources, etc. So spending a bit of time just thinking that and then beginning to annotate that journey. So here's some examples of final maps. And this one helped me remember. If you look closer, you can see this is 2004 to 2005. And I actually was working with this group. They were from the TNT organization. It was 3 risk management groups. And one of the reasons they were having a team development program was they had come to a complete impasse on how they could agree on a risk profile for the business going forward. And I think, I'm not an expert in risk. I think, 1 had 2, 1 had 3, 1 had 4. Apparently that's a huge difference in risk terms. So they used voyage mapping, very analytically, broke it up into 4 quarters, and then were able to tell their own story of how they had come to that number. And that was a really useful process for them to be able to understand each other's point of view and then come to a conclusion going forward. Here's one going back to, maybe 10 years when as RSVP, I think this was probably a looking forward one actually, when we were looking at what kind of new product development were we going to have in that year. So just a couple of people working on it. And then here's the kind of final one that we ended up with a couple of weeks ago. So that won't mean anything to anyone other than some drawings on a picture. But for us, particularly when it was explained by each person talking through their story, it was actually a really useful exercise. Originally, I'd thought, well, I'll do this just to capture video, but it was actually really useful and something as a group that we hadn't done over that past period. And then probably the most important part is this bit where you exchange the information. So the part 3 is once people have driven it, you need to explain that and be able to begin to have some actions either to mitigate things that were a problem or to discuss it, what happened. And sharing that information amongst the group is probably the biggest benefit of doing this. So here's another little example where they've actually gone to that point and put it on the map. So this was looking at a new product launch, some relatively simple steps, and then actually capturing and writing the learning that was put on. And what we suggest is that, once you've done that, simply taking a photograph, that can be a record at a later date when you come back in the future and see where you're able to actually put that learning into practice. And just about every organization and group I speak to always says we don't spend enough time in review. We don't spend enough time looking back at what we've done so we can make things better in the future. So what I'd like you to do is, it's very hard to give you a kind of real experience of this, but what I want to do is just for you to spend a couple of minutes thinking about this. So I'm not going to ask people to share anything necessarily unless you want to, but I want you just to take a couple of minutes to think about your own business performance in that last period, lessons learned from COVID, because it's something everyone in the world has been through. So just take some time, a couple of minutes. You can either do it post-COVID as we did, or maybe even lessons learned during COVID. But just from a personal point of view, have a think about what that was like for you. And if you were doing this with a coach, or maybe even for yourself, what might that look like? So again, think about how would you draw that journey? What would it look like if you were using this map and you've got a piece of paper in front of you? Just spend literally just a couple of minutes thinking about what that journey would look like. How would you draw it if you were setting off from the left and going to the right? If you had an intermediate point you wanted to get to, you don't need to use any of the things on this, but just have a think about that shape of journey for a couple of minutes.
Graham, just to check, the sketch that we do can be in any shape or whatever, is it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm not going to ask you to share them, so any shape, but I think using the metaphor of this as a sea journey will help, because when we get to the next stage and you're going to use some annotations, I'm going to try to give you some of these to help. So I'm going to ask Kim if she can send out just this link here, so you can see some pictures there. But Kim's going to send a link where you'll be able to see this example of the laminate and look at some of the descriptions that we've provided to help stimulate you in thinking about how you might use some of these. So Kim will send that link in chat. You can click on it if you want to have a look at it and see if any of those images or descriptions might help you to annotate that map if you were explaining it to someone, or indeed really just to explain to yourself what learning you might take from that period. I'll just give you another kind of 30 seconds just to kind of think about that. So obviously we're doing this in a couple of minutes. You would want to spend a little bit of time, especially if you're on a one-to-one basis, helping maybe coach someone through that. But I'm sure everyone can get a sense of it, hopefully from here. So I'm just interested, feel free to put something in the chat to everyone, or indeed open your mic. But if anyone's prepared to share anything just about maybe what was the context of that journey, did you interpret any of those images in any particular way? I'm just interested to hear if anyone's willing to share what was going on for them.
Graham, I'll go. It's Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.
I was just reflecting on the COVID experience, and I guess probably where I got stuck initially, Graham, was not having a clue of the destination. So I guess staying with the metaphor, I guess sailing around in circles for quite a long time until maybe the destination became a little bit clearer.
Yeah.
So I guess the way the map's drawn, you're thinking we are heading somewhere, but maybe for that particular example, I'm not sure I was.
Yeah, I think that's very real for a lot of us, and it was certainly very real for myself. I mean, generally you end up somewhere, and it might not have been by accident, it might have been by design. And in our case, we very much had that, went round in circles, and we felt we needed something to divert us. So we were probably looking at the merchants bringing on, and all we could really divert was our mind. So we went back into design mode and started to look at some of the online products, So I guess much like, and that's why I think the metaphor for me is quite interesting, because in relation to COVID, because these people, when they did this in olden times, they were setting off. They didn't actually know where they were going to. They just wanted to find somewhere new. And when most people start a business, they've got a very good idea of where they want to get to. In the middle of COVID, I lost all of that, and certainly had no idea where we were going. It was a very, very strange feeling, but looking back on it now, you know, I think a number of things, both personally and for the business, we're probably better for. So yeah, I recognise absolutely what you're saying. Anyone else got anything they want to share?
I was just going to say that I just took it from where I am now. That was my destination. So it was during COVID, and it's where you are now. So that was the journey I took, rather than not knowing. I've just taken it as then and now. And that was the journey. And then the line depended on various things with mist and sharks and whatever else in there.
Yeah.
And I think the more you've got, I think that the visual aspects in terms of the different things that you can put in really make it a joyful thing to do, or an amusing thing to do, which frees up people's creativity.
Thanks, Les. Yeah, I mean, I think, as I say, like me, if you're not particularly creative, you know, and you're faced with trying to do this, it appears a little bit daunting. And my experience is that using it with very kind of technical people actually works much better, you know, because they get a chance to be a bit more creative without, you know, the limitations of their ability to think they can make the links to images, and any type of imagery works really well for getting conversations going. So yeah, great.
I think the fun of it, of calling John whatever, you know, I think would just lighten the whole atmosphere of in terms of the culture of an organization. It's going to help smooth that out to some degree.
Yeah, great, thank you. So I just wanted to give you an experience for those of you who have not seen it, because I think it is an activity that takes a little bit of time, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. This is not a 5-minute icebreaker activity. This is something that you need to commit, I think, a little bit of time in order to get some returns from. So, and of course, there's the Charting the Future version, and not surprisingly, that works very much in exactly the same way. The facilitator will decide on the timescale and the topic. So are we looking at, business planning for the next year? Are we looking at new product development over the next 5 years? Are we looking at the new project, the new cohort that we're going to be working with, whatever it may be? And I guess here, going back to some of those skills that we looked at earlier from that are going to be in demand by business, you need to be able to critically evaluate and share views on the goals that other people have set. You need to be involved in scenario planning to do this, and risk management, and you need to prepare as best as you can for that successful voyage ahead. And again, some people struggle with this if they've not been used to it. And again, one of the methodologies I think is always worthwhile having a look at is to do your best case scenario of, if everything went absolutely fantastic, what would this future journey look like? And if everything was terrible, what would it look like? Take a photo of both, and then you've got something you can compare and contrast to begin to prepare, identifying the threats, facing the opportunities, and to be able to build your action plan. But often, a group that's done looking at something previously that's already happened is better prepared to begin their future planning. So normally we would see it as a 2-stage process. Some of the kind of practical things, a lot of people say, well, how is it reusable? If you haven't seen these little stickers, they are static cling. So although we're showing the board on flat down on a desk, if you stood it up and put these on, they will stick to it. They have a little backing paper which you need to take off, but you can just remove and reposition them at will. We do provide the write-on wipe-off pens. Please do not, if you have one of these, use permanent marker. It won't come off, I can tell you that, because I've done it. And once they've been used for a while, as you can see, Kim's actually trying to clean this one off. This is a board that's been used many times. My highly desirable tip is to use sticker remover. I'm sure other brands are available, and you'll find a link to Amazon to buy this on the website, but this is miraculous stuff. All of the whiteboard cleaners and other things that I've tried didn't quite work. So if you end up with a voyage map that looks a bit like this, taking a little bit of this cleaner works wonders for renovating it. So we don't provide it in it, partly because it's highly flammable and can't really ship it around the place. But if your board starts to look a little bit grubby, I can thoroughly recommend it. So again, we've talked a little bit, or I've talked a little bit about this already, but just some specifics in terms of the learning. So using it with groups certainly provides that opportunity to review and share experience from anything that's been completed. Probably as facilitators, helping to clarify the learning that's available from it, because not all will be useful. And then as part of that two-stage process, obviously taking it forward to look at future challenges. Again, if you're familiar with the RSVP website, we try to have a maximum of 6 kind of learning focus areas for each product. Action planning, collaboration, goal setting, and monitoring are probably pretty obvious from what I've described. By group management, we mean a kind of facilitation tool that you could use for a group. So it's not really an activity as such, it's a tool to help manage the group in terms of their thinking and their learning. I mentioned TNT earlier, and in fact, they took that into their organization quite specifically as a risk management tool. And we've got a little page on how they use that for people who want to use it for that kind of topic. And of course, in general, looking at strategic thinking. Rather than me give you more, here's a couple of quotes from the website, and I'll let you just read this one as it goes, because it was a kind of unusual use for it. So Axel is German, working in Japan, a fluent Japanese speaker. I'm always touched when you create an activity in the UK and find it being used on the other side of the world in a totally different language. It's always fun for me. But I guess this common, this is quite common, sorry. At first I was expecting them to be lost, any facilitator going to an experiential learning tool for the first time is going to be kind of apprehensive, but this one seems to cause a bit more apprehension than most for some reason. I'm not sure if they'll be able to use it. So here's another quote, kind of similar in terms of the approach. John is an independent consultant. I know him quite well. He's a fairly cynical West of Scotland chap like myself. So I was glad to hear that, although I had to persuade him to give it a try, it seemed to be worthwhile. Another common question that we'll get really with any activity is, how long do I need to put in my program to run a voyage mapping session? And normally I would give you a kind of answer. I'm really struggling to do that here, and you'll find this kind of more detailed description in the guide. But because we're talking about a set of resources and process rather than a task, the time is really completely dependent on how you choose to use that activity. As I say, I think if you try to use it in 10 or 15 minutes, you'll not get value out of it. So it's generally an extended process, and there are generally 2 phases. You're looking backwards first before you look forward, although you could do either. And each takes a little bit of time, especially if you're wanting to use the different voices in that group and give them all the opportunity to be heard. That does take time. So it's worthwhile thinking about if you do plan to use it. If really pushed, the minimum times we would suggest would be for a group probably 30 minutes to actually do it, and 30 minutes to draw learning from the shared experience. The one that I said that we use is a group of 3. I think we did the whole thing probably in about 40 minutes. We spent about 20 minutes drawing out those plans and about 20 minutes sharing experience, but that's quite a small group. So I think on the website, I've probably said a minimum of 30 minutes really, but that would be for, quite a short thing to review. In terms of future planning, it tends to take a little bit more because, you have a bit more debate about what might happen in the future and more explanations. So future planning tends to take a little bit more than a group learning review in my experience. So I know time is not a luxury for any groups, but in practice, I think realistically an hour, if you can get a chance to get 2 or 3 hours to look at in-depth discussion and applying learning, hopefully you would find it would be a good tool in even a half day or a full day workshop. So I'm doing not bad, actually. I'm pretty much ahead of time. In terms of the individual versions that I mentioned, so if you're in the US, we ship directly from the US, so you can purchase from there. We ship from California. Anyone else in the rest of the world would buy online on the UK site. As you can see, the roll-up Voyage Mapping is the same size as the standard one. The Voyage, the large group, will probably take, I would reckon, maybe 8 to 10 people, and probably 4 to 6 is probably what I would say for the smaller one. So depending on your numbers. Oh, I've clicked on that, which I didn't want to do. Let me go back. The hardback, which I mentioned, again, $299 in the UK, $449 in dollars from California. And then the Voyage Mapping individual version, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. So again, we got in the last few years, a lot of interest from people wanting to use it purely as a coaching tool. So the other three are really just different sizes of map, but the individual one has some slight differences, which I'll just kind of raise just now. They have the same cartoon stickers. They have a different facilitator guide, different keys, and a different map size. So these are, in European terms, an A3 size map. So the idea, just as we were trying to do with you, we would give everyone an individual map. So either working on a one-to-one basis in a coaching context, or where you're looking maybe at some personal things that you don't want necessarily to share with the group, depending on what it might be to do with career planning, or it might be to do with something else that's a bit more sensitive. Everyone would have a map, so there are 16 in the set, and 16 sets of cartoons. And again, they would get a specific brief around reflecting on their own personal past experience or charting the future. And again, a little pen to get started. So here's an example of the applications in terms of the individual one. So looking at what we call learning power and understanding a personal learning process. So this might be around kind of metacognitive skills, and I know lots of organizations are interested in helping people become effective learners. You know, I happened to be in the US a couple of months ago. For the first time I'd been on a business travel for a couple of years, but we had a panel from of the tech companies there. So Google, Amazon, Facebook, they were all represented. And what they were all saying is that the war for talent in there means that they have no other choice than to develop their own internal staff. And they're putting more and more resources into things like helping people become better learners. You know, I think they reckon their software engineers are essentially, their skills are redundant now between 18 months and 2 years' time. Personal coaching, obviously been a huge increase in personal coaching across the world, and then specifically a more elongated process perhaps in terms of performance management. Here's an idea of just some of the suggestions for the brief, very similar, but the language is more now about learning you've been involved with, getting people to think about learning in a wider context than just academic or professional qualifications. Particularly around experience and maybe working with others. And again, then the keys to the cartoons, although the cartoons are the same, we've got some different suggestions. So losing direction, did anything knock you off course during your learning efforts? How did you deal with these unplanned diversions? And here, fog is more about lack of clarity. We know one of the things I mentioned there was learning power. We know that good learners have the ability to have resilience and to get through things, and learning is difficult. Generally, good learning is a difficult thing to achieve. So I'm pleased to say I'm got to the end of that relatively quickly, and apologies we didn't get a huge amount of interaction there. It's much more of a kind of presentation of materials, but happy to hear any questions if Kim wasn't able to answer any that have been put forward. Or any thoughts on what I've presented so far?
Can I just give you one, Graham? I don't know if you noticed it in the chat. I know you covered it being quite difficult to know the time to spend on the group one, but Scott was just looking for some guidance on what you might expect to spend on the group one versus the one-to-one version if you were doing it. Is there any kind of advice you could give him there?
Yeah, I hate to always say this, Scott, but I think it kind of depends on the topic. So, you know, if on one-to-one, it's a coaching conversation. So if it's a 15-minute coaching catch up over the phone, it's not probably going to be appropriate. You know, it's probably something you would do in a bit more depth, maybe at the start of a coaching contract and setting out that, or where there's, you really want the individual to spend a considerable time reviewing something or looking ahead. So again, I think realistically, you're probably talking a good 30 to 40 minutes, I would guess, to have people to really think through everything they would need to think through. Again, if people have got different experiences, if you've used it in a coaching context, by all means, add to what I've said.
The more you'll start to limit time, the more you limit the thinking. For me, the more space there is, the more people will come forward and create something. As soon as you start limiting it and putting a time limit on it, you're already controlling, as far as I'm concerned, the creative and emotional connection.
Thanks, Les. I know it's not easy, but hopefully on a one-to-one basis, you've got some time. And again, there's no reason why this can't be a two-step process. You could come back again, and revisit it. Take a photograph of it. If you don't need to wipe it off, let the person keep it and give some thought, and then come back and do it. I think there's a number of things you could probably do there.
Okay, thank you so much, Graham. Very suggestive.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Graham and Kim. This was great. Love the
problem.
concept. Looking
Great.
forward to using this.
Thanks, Barty.
Thank you.
Take care.